Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to present two people who are unquestioned authorities on the history of country music and specifically the Grand Ole Opry. It is the 100th anniversary of the Opry, and I wanted to celebrate this milestone in our own unique way. And I promise you will leave smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. The second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I'm a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones, and ask questions of our speakers. Also, this is very important. Please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not do this for free. Special thank you to MedJet, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Tennessee Brew Works, and Better Than Booze. Let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome back my good pal, Craig Havighurst. He's editorial director for WMOT Roots Radio 89.5 FM, where he covers music news and hosts weekly interview show called The String. A Nashville-based author, journalist, broadcaster, and media producer, Craig has covered music since the late 1990s for NPR, WPLN-FM, The Wall Street Journal, Acoustic Guitar, No Depression, and many other outlets. He was a staff writer at the Daily Tennessean from 2000 to 2004 and senior producer, co-host of Music City Roots from 2009 to 2018. He's the author of Air Castle of the South, WSM and the Making of Music City, and a new book called Musicality for Modern Humans, How to Listen Like an Artist. And that is coming in October from the Sager Group. Welcome back, Craig. It is always an honor to have you on our platform.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Eric.
And joining today as our featured guest is Eric Marcum. He joined the WSM staff in 2010 after graduating from Purdue University and making the move to Nashville. His broadcasting journey began in high school at WKPW in Knightstown, Indiana, and continued at WMDH in nearby Newcastle. Over the years, Eric has worn many hats at WSM, from promotions team member to longtime producer of Coffee, Country, and Cody, and an on-air personality for Route 650, where he championed the best of Americana music. Today, he serves as general manager, proudly guiding the station as it approaches its centennial milestone and beyond. It is my pleasure to welcome these two rock stars here today. Take it away, boys.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate you having us.
Yeah. Eric, I thought a cool way to start would be to have you and then myself go through a little story about less our professional journeys, but our journey into coming to an understanding and an appreciation about WSM and the Opry and its place in American history. Like, when did it become something more than a company with some heritage, something in a Nashville landmark, and become something emotional, something that you wanted to defend with your heart and grow the story and everything? Because it sure seized me in the late 90s. I'll get into it. But what's your story in that respect?
For WSM specifically, I learned about the radio station from a cover of a Ricky Skaggs album, and he was standing in front of a microphone and it said WSM. And I'd never seen call letters for a radio station that were just 3 call letters. Everything I had ever heard my entire life were mostly FM at that point, and 4 call letters. It was also that time that I learned that anything west of the Mississippi was starting with a K. So it was my introduction really to radio. I fell in love with radio whenever there was a late night call-in request show on WMDH 102.5 in Newcastle, Indiana. It was a Friday night, and um, they recorded my call. And I sat there and didn't know how things worked. I was like, well, was it live? Was it recorded?
Mhm.
And then I heard my voice for the very first time on the radio, and it was me on a request show hearing my voice back, and the bug bit me. Then it was, of course, listening to Ricky Skaggs with my grandmother or my dad. We grew up listening to country music, but it intrigued me to see WSM on the front of an album cover. Then we watched whichever television network at the time that had line dancing from the Wild Horse Saloon and also had Opry Live going at that point. And then I think it was maybe Keith Bilberry and Nan Kelly who were at the helm of some of those Opry Lives. But it was my introduction to Nashville. It was my introduction to WSM radio in the Grand Ole Opry. To me, this station was, first of all, larger than life. Um, it took until 2010, post flood, for me to even visit the city. At that point, I was, 21, 22. So it was later, but I always had this in my mind as this um, heritage location, this Mecca that you had to come visit. And I quickly realized that Nashville had a lot of those Meccas. I don't know that I realized that, like so many others, when you come to Nashville, that Ryman Auditorium and the Grand Ole Opry House are two separate places. One is known as the Old Grand Ole Opry House, which people come to know and love as that is the original Grand Ole Opry. But then I later learned that all of these things were connected within the same company. WSM Radio, Ryman Auditorium, the Grand Ole Opry, it was all intertwined. So to me, it was kind of like seeing all of these things mesh together in one in sort of a big bang of country music in my own world. And coincidentally, whenever I was reaching out and canvassing for jobs as you do when you graduate college, the flood had just happened in Nashville. And one of the callbacks I had was from the legendary WSM. And that being one of the most heritage stations that has ever been a part of my life, to me, I jumped on it immediately.
And what job did you get when you first signed on?
So it was technically board operator. So whenever Eddie Stubbs, I think my first night was Eddie Stubbs doing a red carpet interview live from the IBMA Awards downtown at the old Nashville Convention Center right across from Ryman Auditorium. There was that, Mike Terry from the Station Inn. And then whenever Charlie Matos was out, I would fill in as board operator for Bill Cody's Coffee Country and Cody.
And
Um,
well, I
so
want folks to kind of recognize and dwell on the fact that you are a young guy, but you will go from this job to general manager in, not a lot of years. I mean, it's very impressive. And I'm sure that your feeling for WSM's heritage and its meaning and its importance must have been one of the things that people saw in you to elevate you to this position.
Absolutely. I mean, it started as board operator, filling in the gaps, utility person, to then promotions person. I worked in marketing, traffic and continuity within sales, became the assistant program director, eventually lead producer of the morning show for the television side when we launched Circle Television. So it was all of those small educations, those places of learning how the entire station operates as a business that allowed me the experience to say, listen, I know how we can run this from top to bottom. I'd worked with every member of the team at that point.
Yeah.
So relationship and rapport, that's always important when it comes to a leader, was the foundation was already built for that. And I appreciate all the team members who are here that backed me and were on my recommendation list whenever I applied for the position. Started to do the interviews with upper management, and they recognized um, that I was the type of person that they were ready to give a shot.
Very cool.
But 15 years at the radio station, it's a lot to go from board operator and then probably a new job title every 2 to 3 years. As I learned more and more and more about how the business operates.
That's great. That actually reminds me of the way WSM and National Life, its parent company, operated in the golden era in the 40s, 50s, 60s. People spoke about people I talked to who'd worked either on either side of that company talked about how much mentorship there was, how people stayed out of loyalty, and because they got promoted, they built their career development was really healthy. They had pretty interesting ways of recruiting people, and it was a real healthy ecosystem for talent, not just on the musical side, but on the business side as well. So that's pretty cool that is a kind of part of the ethos that's been maintained. Yeah.
It's funny you say that, how the company recognizes talent, and not necessarily has to reach out and headhunt from a particular company. While those opportunities exist for different parts of divisions within the company, I was recently grateful enough to have a conversation with Bud Wendell. He's nearly the same age as the radio station. I think he's 97, maybe 98 at this point.
Yeah.
And how he came up within the company, working as a salesman from the National Life and Accident Insurance Company, worked in multiple divisions, in multiple markets selling insurance. And it was from that conversation that we had that I found out, I can't remember where he was, what division he was in particular, whenever they decided to send him to Nashville to learn the business operations of the station, because they needed a businessman to run this station, to run this company, to make it a business rather than just a piece of programming on Saturday night with a radio station. They didn't know what to do with it. And that's quickly how Bud Wendell became Jack DeWitt's assistant and protege. To me, I felt like a little piece of my story came from Bud Wendell's story. Hearing me sort of reach out to Joe Lamardi at the time, who was programming the radio station, him seeing my resume, seeing the work that I did, decided to take a shot on somebody who was from out of town, who was just moving in. And then working my way up and feeling like this company and this radio station recognized that that I was the person for the job. Made me look at Bud Wendell and respect this position and this role even more, because this was his role.
Yeah, that's splendid. That's splendid. Well, I loved radio too growing up. Got caught, when I got a little clock radio by my bed, I was discovered that you could hear Chicago and Pittsburgh, and that struck me. And I loved hearing interview shows. I was in the tail end of the CBS Radio Mystery Theater, which was a fully produced radio drama, and I think they were producing them new in the '70s. Maybe they were running reruns, but they caught me. And National Public Radio growing up, the news reporting, the cultural reporting especially got to me. So I was kind of on that path, but not necessarily career-wise. I just thought it was one of the great media formats, and a great American story, and a great, I love baseball on the radio and all that. But I was, fully a print guy when I started to think about the WSM story. I moved to Nashville in '96 and began to get focused. And as I was moving here, I started reading some of the deeper histories of country music. I wanted to know kind of what this tradition meant, who the must know artists were. But in Bill Malone's great Country Music USA book, he talks a lot about the broadcasters in the 1950s and how the radio DJs, as they began to get the very idea of being a country DJ, it came into focus in the 40s and 50s. They also began to promote shows in their regions. They would make deals with schoolhouses or with, bars or just venues to put on music. And there was one guy who he named, it was called Tom Perryman. And that struck me, A, because he sounded like a real character, and B, because he shared my middle name, my grandmother's maiden name. And we never figured out if we were kin, but it made a good icebreaker when I finally tracked him down and found him. And he was this fabulous, feisty old guy. And he had what I remember is the first overnight shift on WSM playing country music in the '50s. He had a background in Texas, long story, but he was this, I was like, wow, these characters, they're really rich. They're really American. They're entrepreneurial, and they're folksy, and they're street smart. And Tom Perryman told me about his memories of the early disc jockey conventions, which WSM created in order to celebrate the Opry's birthday as a promotional means of introducing the Opry stars to the regional disc jockeys all over the country and Canada, and sending them home with, you know, wide eyes and having met the stars and having had a great time and a lot of drinking, a lot of good just camaraderie.
Call it a good-natured riot.
That was the later Good Natured Riot. That's exactly right. And then that spread the music. Those DJs are more likely to pick up the next Hank Snow record, pick up the next Kitty Wells record. So they really played their hand well. And I just began to read pieces and parts. And then I thought, well, I need to know this. And WSM was kind of hip when I got to town in the late 90s. The people who were going down to Lower Broadway to listen to BR 549 or the country bands on the early revival of Lower Broadway, the rockabilly dancer types, they were tuning into WSM because Eddie Stubbs was doing classic country, because there was something just kind of cool and analog and interesting about it, and it was where classic country lived in Nashville. And so I began to sense, well, there must be a story, there must be a book about WSM. I mean, there's a lot. I've read the Grand Ole Opry story, 14 times now, but there's this interesting National Life and Accident Insurance Company. And then there's this WSM call letters, which were turned on in 1925, which was not early by radio standards, but early by American history standards and by music industry standards. So it turned out there wasn't such a book, and that was just an invitation to start looking into it. My first real substantive, the first character that came to life was going to the Country Music Hall of Fame's oral history section, and I asked to read, or I guess I was reading the transcript at the time, of Jack DeWitt's story, the chief engineer who was there at the dawn of the station and who spent years as the chief engineer, who oversaw the building of the tower you guys still broadcast from in 1932, and did all kinds of crazy things like bouncing radar waves off the moon and building his own telescope and running WSM in a way that was both, I would learn, had some ups and some downs. It was a complicated thing, but he got it through a key period. And DeWitt just struck me as a really interesting character. He also did not like country music, which was another sort of fun thing to learn about the guy that was enabling the Opry. But from there, I was hooked. I was really like, I could see all these interesting people. And there was just enough of a historic record to piece it all together. You probably wish there was more historic records sometimes. There's a lot of documents that we don't have, right?
Yeah, a lot. And first of all, gracious enough and happy enough to have you here to join us at WSM and the Grand Ole Opry to go through some of the archives. And there's some great programming pieces that we're working on this year in our 100th, including WSM Remembers, hosted by Kyle Cantrell and David Reed. So you were here with us at our studios, and I was happy enough to take you down and show you some of the archives that are there. And you can see where Tim Davis and Emily Franz are leading the charge of the Opry Entertainment Group archives. Every single day, something new is coming up. Somebody had something in their closet, somebody had something in their attic, and they want to make sure it finds the right home. And the story keeps coming out. We keep learning more things, whether it's, how Lula Naff ran Ryman Auditorium, or how, McGee, I can't think of his name, Fiddlin' Sid's neighbor.
Sam and Kirk McGee.
Yeah, exactly. How he made it to the Grand Ole Opry and his neighbor drove him, and there were records of their family writing songs together in a song that I don't think we had ever known existed from Fiddlin' Sid as a tribute to the Grand Ole Opry. Things like that were all just discovered about 2 weeks ago. What
It
we
was a
know,
super treat to see that archive, those various lockers, the music instrument collection, photos, letters. You had a letter from George D. Hay to Uncle Jimmy Thompson, who launched the Grand Ole Opry in November of 1925. And it was George Hay was checking in on his health, and it was typewritten and on the old letterhead. That gave me chills, man.
this whole year has really given our staff, we call ourselves the Centennial staff, a time to reflect on what this radio station and what this Grand Ole Opry show has has created in the world of Nashville, Tennessee, and Music City, USA. Time to reflect, time to go through records that haven't been documented, undigitized tapes. We've now had the opportunity to take the time and digitize them, and learn more about our history. We get so caught up in a lot of the day to day, and naturally so. You want to keep the ball moving forward. You want to continue making history yourselves. But this is a good opportunity to carve out a little more time to reflect on the stories that haven't been told. And I think that's a good feature for us on right now. It's Monday nights, the WSM Remember series, is that David Reed and Kyle Cantrell, Kyle, an alum of WSM, was leading the programming through the 90s and 2000s, would come to me and say, look what we found. And Kyle saying, well, if I would have had this in the 75th, then, it would have really pieced a few things together within the puzzle of the 75th WSM Remembers series that he did.
Yeah,
So
I was going to mention that. Yeah, because
been
Kyle was a real early entree for me. He knew more about the history and was able to point me in the direction of sources. And his WSM Remembers series then had sound, had air checks. It had samples of programs from the 40s, and in one case, I remember the 1930s. You could hear one of those produced all live, in the real time radio programs with the announcers and the background singers and an orchestra and sound effects people. And then as I began to see photos of what those productions looked like with everybody in their place, all the many microphones running into the mixing console, it was just so visceral and so beautiful. And Kyle was ultra just so kind with me, and he put together that series then. And I gather it's not an update of that series. He started from scratch. And is that correct to say that this new series is all newly produced?
completely newly produced. Of course, we went back to his 75th anniversary and harvested some of the archived material. But it is he, Kyle, and our WSM at Night host David Reed sitting down and reflecting on these pieces. For Kyle, he hasn't heard them in 25 years, so there's a whole new appreciation for where you are in your life and how you hear these pieces and how you see WSM today. And it's being organized in a pre-produced 9-part series. And the 10th episode we plan to have as a live celebration on October 5th, which is the actual 100th anniversary of WSM. We'll be doing it inside our studios with Kyle interviewing our existing Opry announcers, Mike Terry, Kelly Sutton, Charlie Matos, and Bill Cody, to reflect on the last 25 years. What are the notable things that have happened both on the Opry stage and in the WSM studio? It's going to be a really great event. It's a part of Opry Community Day. I invite everybody to come out to the Grand Ole Opry House on the Opry Plaza. If you're a Tennessee resident, I'm going to do my righteous plug here. If you've got your Tennessee ID, it'll get you a free tour of the Grand Ole Opry House. It's a guided tour, so you have a tour guide to take you through a great video to kick things off in what's labeled the Circle Room. You go backstage at the Grand Ole Opry House, and then ultimately you end your tour with a self-guided tour inside the WSM studio exhibit. We recently moved. I know that a lot of people who have been fans of WSM radio have known it for decades inside the Gaylord Opryland Resort and Convention Center. And the hotel, mid-2024, announced that we were investing capital to do an expansion on the hotel and some renovations, which would have displaced our broadcast studio for at least a year for us to go back in. And it was ultimately determined that we need to find a new home for WSM. There were a few different options and iterations over the last few years that we'd kicked around. And just coincidentally, they were turning over the exhibit space that was living inside the Roy Acuff House on the plaza of the Grand Ole Opry, which is truly where Roy lived his final years, I think 8 years in that home. Bud Wendell, I mentioned him earlier, was the one that approved and had everything created for the home to be built. Roy came to him and said, I spend enough time over here. I think he was living in Inglewood at the time.
Huh?
He wakes up early, wanted to be a part of the theme park, wanted to be a part of the business, wanted to continue being a character, a focal point of the Grand Ole Opry. Would wake up early, come make coffee for people who were already backstage, and Bud knew the value and the heart and the soul of somebody like Roy Acuff, and without any thought said, "We will build you a house." And Roy lived in there for 8 years.
Oh, that
Um,
structure was actually built at the time to be his home. It wasn't a building you found another use for. Oh,
correct.
wild. Okay. So
Yep.
then since his passing, it's been several things, but now it's not just a WSM studio, but one that the public from the outside can see in through a big glass window, and
Hmm.
then enter to a nice little museum that includes things like a great film about the WSM Tower. It's got some artifacts of the engineering team, a portable transmitter that they used to carry on their backpack when they went out in the field to do reports from anything from a political rally to a stock car race to the World War II maneuvers in Tennessee in World War II. And when I saw that that little micro transmitter, that shortwave radio that Jack DeWitt and his crew had built, I got chills. That was a real, because I'd seen that in photos and I knew what its story had been, and it was wild to see it.
That's the most fascinating piece of technology that we have. One, it's about, 150 pounds. It takes two people to pick it up. I can't imagine just lugging
Oh,
that thing on your back and taking it
yeah.
through the field. But if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the or was the first to go on a moving train to be able to transmit a signal remotely to transmit to and from.
Yeah.
Uh, for all intents and purpose, the first wireless, because it wasn't connected to the telephone grid. That was the thing.
Yeah.
It's basically the first cell phone, right?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I want people to know that story. The Pan American Railroad, the Pan American was the name of the actual train, and it was on the Louisville and Nashville line from Cincinnati to New Orleans. Went through Nashville, stopped daily at the Union Station, at the shed that has sadly been torn down, and somehow in the 30s. Edwin Craig, the head of National Life, seems to have had a conversation with his buddy, the president of the L&N Railroad, and thought, let's do a promotion for L&N and for the Pan American that makes its daily spin. And I think that, oh yeah, DeFord Bailey had taken to the airwaves in the 20s with the Pan American Blues, that great harmonica tune that emulates the train. And so they ran this train by the tracks ran by the WSM tower, just about a couple hundred yards away. So the engineers took a microphone out, and through a lot of timing and a lot of inner ear communication between when the train's leaving the station and when it's arriving in there in Brentwood, and it's not stopping, it's just roaring by. They played the train on the air, just so and the radio audience heard this locomotive and the blast of the whistle. And today we would think, what is that? What big deal is that? But it lit people's imaginations up. The train was symbolic, and it felt vivid. It was like kind of just real radio, real atmospheric on the in the field radio. And it went so well they kept renewing it, and it became a daily feature on WSM for almost 10 years. And it was about the same people. There were people who would set their watch by it. And there were coal miners that would listen to the WSM all day. And then when that train went by and the whistle blew at 5:12 in the afternoon, they were like, that's it. That's the end of the workday. It's just so many layers of that story. And it's one of those kind of off the wall things that WSM would try from a promotional point of view and a kind of capturing Southern culture and life, and some stuff that was really relatable for people. Just absolutely brilliant. So you're spot on with why that technology mattered. Why it wasn't just for inner corporate communication or something. It really changed people's lives.
We've got a couple of pieces of technology side by side. That unit that you're talking about, created by Jack DeWitt, which would have been built using the existing lathes and the existing tools at the tower and transmitter building at I-65 and Concord Road. We don't offer full tours of that because of safety protocol and procedures, but occasionally we'll do private tours. But it's still the capacitors, it's still the wartime stamps that are on the side from the 40s. Those are machines that were approved by the government to continue to be used for WSM radio that are still as if they were to be in and used today or yesterday, not been moved. That's one of the great things about WSM engineers over the time is everybody has known the significance of this radio station and has kept everything in pristine condition and in the place that they left it. Every engineer has left this radio station in a better shape than how they arrived. I think that's just a fascinating thing, and I feel that weight as the general manager of the radio station, also overseeing the programming department and the sales department. You always want to leave the radio station better than how you found it. There's a great question here in the chat also while we're on the topic of Opry stars, and we were discussing Roy Acuff and the tribute to him. What would be the Mount Rushmore of the Grand Ole Opry personalities? 4 people only. Um, we could probably drum up some controversy here. Certainly, I think Roy Acuff is on the Mount Rushmore of country
Longest
music.
standing patriarch, the longest standing senior member. Yeah, absolutely. Acuff was one of the icons.
I think number 2 for the notoriety and the personality that she brought to the Grand Ole Opry and WSM is Minnie Pearl. I think another would be Ernest Tubb.
I thought of him too. I had him in my mind. I was wondering if you'd go there.
The second longest running radio show in history would be the Midnight Jamboree. And he's the one that took country music even further if it were on Saturday nights, because in this era, as you mentioned before, WSM was a first full service radio station that wasn't necessarily country during the daytime hours. A lot of news talk, a lot of farm reports, rural reports, classical music, pop music. But Saturday nights were really at the time in that era dedicated for country music, especially from Ryman Auditorium. Ernest Tubb opened up his record shop on Broadway and would continue the party, continue that good-natured riot and head across the way. And that's where you heard the first time the voices of Loretta Lynn on the radio would have been on Ernest Tubb's Midnight Jamboree. So I think Ernest Tubb, I would consider Ernest one of the prominent voices and personalities of WSM that did more than, I don't want to say just contribute on the Grand Ole Opry, but truly became a personality with his own show.
Yeah, an
so
ambassador.
Roy Acuff, Minnie Pearl, Ernest Tubb, and the next. Go ahead.
I'd put Bill Monroe there.
Yep.
Because he was an Opry member before he invented bluegrass, an Opry member while he invented bluegrass, and as much of a, and then he was the father. So, I'm personally fond.
And for this radio station to be so closely tied for WSM, the Grand Ole Opry, in which Bill Monroe was a member of, and Ryman Auditorium to be the birthplace of bluegrass, right? It's the home where bluegrass was born, which would have been on the airwaves of WSM radio for as notable of a genre and a common thread in country music and Appalachian roots of bluegrass. Bill Monroe is it.
Yeah.
So there's your 4.
Which raises a question I wanted to bring up at some point this hour, which is how the Opry's, who are the Opry's patriarchs and matriarchs now? In the time I've been in Nashville, we've seen some of the greats pass on. Porter Wagner was arguably in the spot that Roy Acuff had been before. We just lost Jeannie Seely at 85 years old, and she'd been active right up to the end. And it's not we are simply the generation who were the icons of the 50s and 60s are just by sheer math and time are no longer with us. I think today of people like Marty Stewart and Ricky Skaggs, but who have been, and we lost little Jimmy Dickens, who was another one who globally symbolized the elder statesman, right? Who are they to you these days, and how does WSM and the Opry think about cultivating that tier of the Opry story and presentation.
Well, I think from a patriarch perspective, you look at somebody like Bill Anderson, who you get stories out of Bill like no other. Starting out in radio, being a personality in radio, making his way to Nashville and songwriting. He was a part of a campaign called Mr. DJ USA, where DJs around the country would apply to come to Nashville, Tennessee, and be a guest DJ on
Oh
the
yeah,
radio
Tom
and
Perryman
go.
won that too. That's
Yep.
right.
So Bill Anderson has that part of the history of WSM to then come on and do numerous shows through television as well. Not just WSM. He had game shows, interview shows, and of course, the linchpin of all of Bill Anderson's career has been able to walk onto the stage of the Grand Ole Opry for, God, goodness, I can't. I think it's 60 years that he's
Yeah,
been a member, if I'm
not a
not
stretch
mistaken.
whatsoever. Also a leading songwriter.
Absolutely. The songs hold the test of time. Um, the songs that he wrote in the 60s and 70s are just, you know, they just don't write them like they used to. Let's just put it that way. And what he is instilling into songwriters today is the experience and the knowledge, um, just let's just call it injected right into their veins. But
Yeah.
it's amazing for him to open up his door to so many of the new and young songwriters to get that experience and that knowledge from Bill Anderson, and for Bill to go out there and perform as often as he does. Um, my great thought of WSM and the musical programming of what you hear on the radio station is a direct reflection of the programming on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. There is somebody who bought a ticket to go to the Grand Ole Opry show and see Bill Anderson, who was just mentioned here, 64
Yeah.
years as a member of the Opry.
Yeah,
Thanks, Denise.
thanks, Denise DeMaria, for that note. 64 years as an Opry member. She looked up in real time.
Somebody bought a ticket to the Grand Ole Opry to see Bill Anderson, and they've never been to a Grand Ole Opry show before. They may not know the format. They may have heard the folklore of what the Grand Ole Opry is, but they bought a ticket to see Bill Anderson. They walk into those doors and they sit down, and there is an artist who is making their Grand Ole Opry debut. That person that bought a ticket to see Bill Anderson has no idea who this Opry debut artist. But I can guarantee you in the wings, just before that person was about to go out, Bill Anderson had some words of advice, some
Yeah.
encouragement, and shared some experience and some history with that person so they knew the gravity in which they were about to do in walking into that circle.
Yeah.
That person who bought that ticket to see Bill Anderson is sitting next to somebody who bought a ticket to see that person's Opry debut. They're probably being introduced to Bill Anderson for the very first time and Whiskey Lullaby and the songs that he wrote. To me, that experience of legacy artists, the people who built the foundation of what is the Grand Ole Opry, and then the experience of somebody who will always carry the gravity of an Opry debut on their shoulders and appreciate that in their heart on forever for the rest of their career and hopefully become a Carrie Underwood or a Brad Paisley or a Marty Stewart to then carry the torch of Bill Anderson's experience. I feel that whenever I see Brad Paisley on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. So much about somebody like Brad, who is in and has been for a while in the top of their career. Nothing about, you know, they don't need to come back to the Grand Ole Opry, but they
Mhm.
know when they made their Opry debut and little Jimmy Dickens was standing there with them,
Yeah.
that it was special. And long after little Jimmy is gone and Brad Paisley becomes that patriarch, he is going to be doing that for somebody making their debut. That's what's
Cool.
special about country music and the Grand Ole Opry. And that's what's special about the world of WSM music and the programming. It's a direct reflection of what you get to experience. And truly what WSM is an education of what you're going to experience on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry when you buy a ticket.
You make me want to think. I'd mentioned Connie Smith,
Connie
who
Smith.
one of the great voices of all time, and who broke out with a Bill Anderson song "Once a Day."
Mhm.
And she has been, I think, an anchor, fair to say, in recent years, and one of the classic country voices people come to see. Anybody else come to mind in that generation? I think you're right that Brad Paisley is going to grow into
Mhm.
that role when he gets some. Does he have a gray hair in his head yet?
Not yet, not yet. So we still Marty Stewart. You think you say Connie Smith? Marty Stewart is right behind. He will be a patriarch forever. I mean, he is. Um, I think he will be the linchpin of the Grand Ole Opry for the next 20 or 30 years. He will. be that person who always shows up. He'll be there as long as health will allow him. You can tell when he's there, he carries that tradition on his sleeve. He loves it. And hearing the stories of how he and Connie Smith met for the very first time, because they're celebrating many years together, married.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell it probably incorrectly by revisionist history here, but I know that Marty Stewart was a young boy and went to a Connie Smith show, got to see her in line for a meet and greet after the show. There's a great photo of Marty as a young boy meeting Connie, and he said to his mother, "I'm going to marry that woman." And it took years and years and years. And of course, the legend is Marty in his teens getting off the tour bus, or not the tour bus, off the Greyhound bus, walked off first time in Nashville. First steps in Nashville were at the front of the Ryman Auditorium, and just a few years later made his way to the stage there. But many years married. I see a comment in here from Roland. Vince Gill, absolutely. When I talk about songwriters who take the time out of their day to meet with a songwriter who isn't as notable as Vince Gill, Vince is one of the first that will open up the door to sit down with these young songwriters and educate them on how he songwrites, and maybe give them their first break on a hit, or maybe he's going into the studio to record with them. But Vince Gill, certainly, and it can't be understated how great, one, the Time Jumpers are, but the Time Jumpers with Vince Gill are phenomenal. Everybody's talking about the Eagles. I want to talk about the Time Jumpers. That's
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Me too. Yeah, rad. I made a little list of some of the Opry debuts on the other side that have happened in the last, I don't know, year or two. I wish I had a running tally, and I looked to see if I could find a list of the last 2 years. You may have one nearby, but I have been constantly pleasantly surprised by artists that I'm following and covering and championing on, that were playing on WMOT and who would definitely be tagged as Americana, who get invited to the Opry. I feel like the Opry has been inviting a really rich and rewarding and diverse and pluralistic kind of a crew of young talent. And just the few that I was able to identify with, like Britt Taylor, I was excited when she was on in real time. I remembered her debut and thought, way to go, Britt, you're awesome. I love her. Benjamin Todd's a great country guy, from traditional country music. William Prince, the songwriter from Canada, beautiful, rich voice. Emily Nenny, country artist from here in town. And there's many, many more. But you guys are having, how many times a week would we be seeing somebody who's making their debut, or is there every Saturday night a slot for one new debut artist? How often does it happen?
That's a great question. It's something that I would have to ask the artist relations team, but I know that Jordan Pettit, Jen Tressler, that group over there with artist relations has done a wonderful job reaching out and doing research on people who are putting out independent projects that aren't necessarily tied to the major labels,
Yeah,
making
right.
sure that those artists for their artwork are being recognized and provide a platform, because that's what the Opry has always been. Gina Keltner is another who has taken the time to do research on artists. But I would say it began with, and I wasn't a part of this project, I know you were, the advent of Music City Roots. I think that
Huh.
really lit a fire in Nashville to provide a stage and to recognize the independent and Americana, the bluegrass, the I would say under championed artists that don't necessarily get the spotlight outside of Nashville, quite like your Broadway style artists. I'll put it that way. But the Opry Entertainment Group team has done a wonderful job. I would say, if I remember right, in the early conversations, they were shooting for 100 debuts for 100 years. I don't know if they were quite able to get to
Okay.
that pinnacle. We never
Yeah,
marketed it that way,
yeah.
but I know that was sort of a goal. And to give you any indication, we have 230 plus shows, 230 Grand Ole Opry shows on the books for 2025 in total. Uh,
Wow.
so I would say, that'd be in the ballpark of
Make
45%
every
of your
Saturday night
shows.
anymore. That's great. Does that include the two shows in one night?
It does. It
Okay, that
does.
counts. Some nights are two, a double
Mhm.
bills.
Yep.
Wow. How else have you guys been approaching 100? What's been the mindset, the strategy, and the tactics? You must have been thinking about this for 2 or 3 years.
Absolutely. And the um, partnership that we have with NBC and Ateros has given us a platform with NBC and Peacock to do the Opry 100, a live celebration show. That has been wonderful marketing for WSM and the Grand Ole Opry to reach a network audience. That first aired in March, and we sent our team members backstage as part of the red carpet. Just a phenomenal show that was produced by NBC. And that's going to re-air Monday, September 15th on NBC. Just FYI, check your local listings on that. But we're putting linchpins in things like October 5th for WSM's celebration. It's Opry 100 celebrates 100 years of WSM. And with that, we're inviting, and I've got this dry erase board back here that I hope isn't too, hopefully the camera isn't too good. Hopefully I'm not giving away any secrets. But there's artists that have confirmed and artists that we have asked. But the goal is to tribute a WSM personality within each segment. So Chris Scruggs in the Stone Fox Five. Chris Scruggs is known as the professor and the band leader for Marty Stewart and the Fabulous Superlatives. Well, Chris does what's called Friends and Neighbors, which is one of those 15-minute style package shows straight out of the 1950s, where he goes into a recording studio and presses record and doesn't stop until 15 minutes are up. And they record just what would the sights and sounds, and you hear instrument flubs, but what it is just pure live radio and in the moment. And he welcomes in a guest, and they talk about their career, they talk about their music, they play a song, they play a classics, they play a new song. And of course, just as WSM and the Grand Ole Opry has done for 100 years, includes sponsorships within that show. Martha White is a great one. You used to have the Coca-Cola Grand Ole Opry. Springer Mountain Farms has been a linchpin in WSM for nearly 2 decades. But Carter Vintage Guitars has been a main proponent of Chris Scruggs and Friends and Neighbors. But he'll come out on the show and bring out a friend and a neighbor to do a performance. And Catch Secor is part of it as well. We're still identifying who and how we want to tribute, but I can see him honoring D. Ford Bailey or getting Uncle Jimmy Thompson's fiddle or Roy Acuff's fiddle and doing, or even George D. Hayes' whistle and doing something fun because Catch is such a character and bringing one of those characters to life. That's one of the things we want to do. And
then the Opry
Mhm.
itself is
Yep.
is turning 100, I think, on November 28th. Is that what you guys regard as the birthday?
Correct. WSM on October 5th. And of course, there was programming for a month and a half before Uncle Jimmy Thompson made his way into the studio of WSM Radio on a Saturday night to play old time fiddle tunes that launched November 28th, 1925, the Barn
It's
Dance.
really wild to learn in my research about how directly George D. Hay was in the sights of Edwin Craig and the National Life folks when WSM first went on the air. They invited George Hay, who had been voted very recently as the most popular broadcaster in America, working at WLS in Chicago and steering the national barn dance. And
That's another great way to find talent and bring them to WSM.
yeah, they must have wined and dined him and painted a really great picture of bringing him. He's from Indiana, I believe, and they brought him to the South and put him in charge of all programming. But before you know it, there is hillbilly music, as they called it then, on the airwaves of WSM, which were otherwise completely reserved for sort of proper society music. Light orchestras, classical operettas, and piano accompaniment, some gospel, the Fitzjubilee Singers. But there was just nothing that you would have called country music on the air except for those Saturday nights after November 28th, 1925. And then there's a bit of controversy about whether that flavor should remain on the growing air castle of the South, this extremely well endowed and well invested station. And the people spoke and said, yeah, we recognize this music. And Edwin Craig liked folk music. He had played a little bit of it himself, and he and George Hayes seem to have had a thing for bringing that flavor of music into the formatless era of WSM.
That's right. Yeah. A few other things that I want to mention because I think we've got about 10 minutes or so left here. So we have the Opry live from London that's coming up. You mentioned the 11/28 show. That will be the Opry's anniversary show. That's a Friday night, so it'll be Black Friday. Goodness gracious, in a mall parking lot. It's going to be a lot of fun. But so you've got 11/28. Opry Live from London is going to be Friday, September 26th at Royal Albert Hall. So we're very excited about sending Kelly Sutton over to host the Royal Albert Hall show alongside Vernon Kay, who is a BBC personality. That show is going to have Luke Combs, Marty Stewart, Carly Pierce, Ashley McBride, Darius Rucker, and a few surprise guests to be announced. And then we're going to do, we've done 3 so far, but this will be our 4th, an evening with the Grand Ole Opry at Carnegie Hall. That is going to be taking place March 20th in 2026. Another thing that we're doing that was recently announced in July, an Opry 100 album, where we've gone into the archives and taken tribute performances and combined some of those with the classic performances of artists, some of which dating back from 1962 all the way up until about 2024, 2025. So within the last year. But highlighting artists like Marty Robbins and Marty Stewart together, Patsy Cline, Johnny Cash, Loretta Lynn, Dolly Parton with Patty Loveless and Marty Stewart, Don Schlitz with Vince Gill, the Charlie Daniels Band. So a lot of wonderful live performances to come out of this album. And WSM will be doing an album special on that as well. It releases Friday, November 7th is the full album release.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to really pay tribute to you guys for balancing the variety of country music that you've been presenting and keeping bluegrass and Americana and classic country very much in the forefront all the way through the years I've been in Nashville. Because I know it's a hard business with a constant flood of artists that Music Row and the CMA's sort of awards-centered mindset want to promote. And they have a pretty big army of radio stations out there that are chain owned and that play kind of centrally programmed stuff. And there's a very kind of industrialized pathway to getting those artists promoted, and it takes a lot of money. And in the, anybody that knows my background as a writer is not going to be surprised that I think that does not produce the greatest aesthetic results often. And we've been through a long era where the artists some of us find the most compelling in country music, Charlie Crockett, Sierra Farrell, have not had any success at country radio, and I'm not sure that that's where they belong or need to be. But y'all at the Opry especially, and programming WSM's daytime and nighttime music menu, you've really got to be mindful, because someone that really wants to hear a diet of George Strait, Vince Gill, and today's George Straits and Vince Gills are going to kind of run away if it's Jelly Roll or music with real trap beats and rapping. And how do you guys weigh that? What's the secret sauce?
Well, I think it's storytelling. Jelly Roll has a story, and he speaks to the people who pay for a ticket at the Grand Ole Opry. The same as Sierra Farrell, Charlie Crockett. You can go down the list of the stories of Charlie Crockett and how he busks through the streets and eventually made his way to Nashville. And we had him on the radio. I think it was 2016. And I think it may have been his first radio interview. WSM has always been an open door to people like Old Crow Medicine Show, who I think
truly an incredible story of the Opry bringing them in and into the fold early on, investing in them, helping them become stars. Just amazing.
Sally Williams, I think, ran into them, discovered them, however you want to consider it, at Merlefest. I believe they were busking there. She recognized their style and their approach. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the original offer was to have Old Crow come outside Ryman Auditorium as, I don't call it a shtick, but certainly as presenting their personalities outside of Ryman Auditorium before shows
Yep.
as a busking centric performance band. To then Old Crow Medicine Show teaming up, I believe it was Dave Rawlings and Gillian Welch, and recording their music at RCA Studio B when tours weren't happening and releasing some of their first projects and just absolutely blowing up to the point where they kicked down the doors of the Grand Ole Opry and said, "You can't stop us now. Here we are."
Yeah.
So good for the boys, good for Ketch, and he's working on his solo record as well. But you can really feel the heart and soul of the Grand Ole Opry when you see somebody like Ketch Secor and Jelly Roll and a Stephen Curtis Chapman and a Don Schlitz. Everybody's a storyteller. There's a story to be told. And one thing with WSM, our differences between WSM and the Grand Ole Opry is that you're required to have the artists be your voice and your influencer. The Opry is not a personality. The Opry is not a person. It is a
Mhm.
show. It's a presentation. While WSM personalities get to be the influencer and the storyteller. Three of the four Opry announcers, you've got Kelly Sutton, Charlie Matos, and Bill Cody. That's a 75% chance. They're the hosts of our morning show. 75% chance they would have been hosting the show the night before. They take the experience that they got watching Jelly Roll interact with a Brad Paisley, watching Post Malone interact with a Vince Gill, and they get to bring that story to the morning show and tell
Wow.
you exactly what you got to feel because everybody in the wings of the Grand Ole Opry, they're rooting for each other. And what we do on WSM is bring that storytelling to life on the radio.
It's a pretty nice note to leave things, I think, if Tom tells us we've done our time, done our bit, and brought it. And but I love that note. I love that stories where this whole town began, and probably the most important thing.
Hey guys, Randy Owen wants us to go on and on and on, so we're not necessarily stopping, but I do have a couple of follow-up questions. I posted a couple here in the chat. I don't know if you saw it. Eric, what is the process whereby an artist is invited to become a member of the Opry? Is that anything you can reveal?
Um, while I'm not on the, I would call it ghost committee that is Opry membership, what I can say, it's a multi-step process. It starts with introducing, whether it's through a label or an independent project to our artist relations team in what's called a My Opry introduction. And that goes from somebody who's brand new that maybe we're seeing their voice and hearing their voice and seeing their name for the very first time, all the way up to a label pitch. They sit down with artist relations and Opry programming, and they play their music. And they'll go into a dressing room and play something live, unmiked, just full acoustic, just for us to really appreciate their story and to see whether or not, we know that they know what the Opry is all about. Are they going to be able to bring their story and will they be able to connect with somebody in the audience? So there's the My Opry introductions. Then it comes to an Opry debut. Then, how often is this artist coming back? When they're at the peak of their career, is the Opry still top of mind? Is the Opry a location where they make a destination when they're back home in Nashville? Whether it's testing new music, whether it's coming back and playing with the band, whether it's knowing that there needs to be money that's donated to the Opry Trust Fund and they're there for a benefit. How often are you supporting the Opry? Because when you're in the twilight of the career, the Opry will support you. And I think that is sort of an overview of, and every story is different. Whenever Jamie Johnson got invited to the Grand Ole Opry, he told the story where I think somebody was in their 70s or the 80s on one of his Opry debut nights, and they got invited to be the newest member of the Grand Ole Opry. And he was like, "Well, I thought I was next in line. Then I turned around and looked where the line was, and I couldn't find it." He's like, "Where does this line begin and where does it end?" So there's a lot of question marks, and that's the one thing. The story of an artist's path to get to the Opry stage is always different, and the
And I was
path.
excited that Kathy Mattea got invited to be a member of the Opry just very recently.
Mhm.
And this speaks to how the criteria could have been different in different decades.
Mhm.
She was a major star, and who knows what her path to potential Opry membership was then, or what obstacles there would have been. But it's lovely that the Opry will open its door to a veteran, even a veteran who's working on another radio show
Mhm.
now that she's with not E-Town, but Mountain Stage. And well, I love Kathy Mattea. So wonderful, wonderful moment for her. You could tell how.
And the road different for somebody like Riders in the Sky, where all they did was send in a letter that said, "Hey, you guys don't have Western swing on here as much anymore. You should make us a member." And next thing you know, the next day they were on the Grand Ole Opry in a time where they were just stamped approval members.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So the
Case by
follow-up to
case,
that,
Tom.
how many members are there?
Oh, that's a great question. You know what? I bet Google will be able to tell me. No, I would have to. I'd have to go do some research.
Well, listen, I can't let this event go without Craig having an opportunity to talk about his new book. Craig, give us an elevator pitch on this new fabulous book that you're bringing out next month.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's called Musicality for Modern Humans: How to Listen Like an Artist. A little wink in that title, but it is a music appreciation book of the old school, but for a new century. The back of it says this book propels music appreciation in the 21st century. I've listened to a wide variety of music since I was a kid, when I started on classical violin and did youth symphony, and then I took up the bass and drums and studied some jazz. And while I never became a professional musician, I have been building into an eclectic view of what music is, of which Americana, folk, and roots is a part. And but I want to champion some of the music that's so great, that's been made through the decades and even to this, and certainly in this modern time, that is not going to be on the radio. It's not going to, and it doesn't have words. It's about music without lyrics, and what to listen for if in music that is more abstract, or that is melody forward, or that is modern and more dissonant. It's about how to build up your whole toolkit to listen to music more insightfully, and told through my life story.
Very cool. Well, as your friend, I've had a great time kind of watching you produce this book over the years. I can't wait for it to hit the shelves. Comes out next month. Is that right?
Yeah, October the 10th.
Awesome. Well, can't wait to go to a book signing and get an autographed copy.
All right, man.
Ladies and gentlemen, I promised you you'd leave here smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. We delivered on that promise. These two guys are walking encyclopedias of music history. Can't thank you enough for sharing some of your wisdom with us today, guys. Eric, what a pleasure. It's no wonder you are the GM there, because it just oozes through your pores. It's terrific to hear. Craig, thank you again for bringing a wonderful guest to our audience. And with that, I'm going to sign off by simply saying be nice to each other, and I hope to see you next week around Americana Fest. Later, folks.
Fabulous. See you around,
Thank
guys.
you, Tom.
Bye.
Thank you, Craig.
Talking to y'all. Bye bye.